Good morning. First of all, what an honor to be asked to be the speaker this morning. Let me start with an apology. I'm a little under the weather. If I start coughing, I'll stop, drink some water, and go on. Again, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my research in the area of team training, team performance, teamwork. Let me start with a quote from Atul Gawande, one quote that he did not use in his presentation. Essentially, if you read some of his work, he argues that healthcare is a team sport with two distinct exceptions. One, that lives depend on it, and then there are no coaches. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why I think all of you need to pay attention to teamwork and team training. And in the last couple of days that I've been in the lectures, as you debate, as you have a dialogue about what training physicians, surgeons need to have, I hope that you find the time to see where teamwork has a place. So what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes is essentially tell you a story, the story whether team training works, whether medical team training works. And the reason I want to do this is for the last 15 years, about half of what I do or more is healthcare. And I've been doing teamwork, team training research, as some of you know, for about 30 years. And in the last 3 or 4 years, every time I will go to a hospital, there was always a CFO, a chief financial officer, or a CEO of a hospital that would say to me, why should I roll out team training? What are the benefits? How do I know that at the end of this investment, we'll get something out of it? Will it improve clinical outcomes? So 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't have a compelling story to tell, but I think I have one now, and that's the story I want to share with you today. Some of the data I'm going to talk to you today is brand new. It's under review in a number of journals, but I hope that you find the data compelling. My email is there. Some of you might be interested in more details on the things I'm going to talk about. Feel free to send me a note, and I'll send you a lot of papers on the benefits, the evaluations of team training. Okay. So let me start with the answer. Yes, team training works. The data is very compelling, like I said. Is it perfect? No. Will it ever be perfect? No. Like I'll show, in 30 years of doing this kind of research, it's very difficult to conduct these evaluations to the point where people feel that there's a cause and effect. But I hope to show you that there is that the data is in the right direction. If the answer is yes, people, most CFOs, CEOs want to know, so why does it work? What are the success factors? If I roll it out in pediatrics, for example, will I do the same thing if I roll it out in the floor or any other where in the hospital? So what I've done today is essentially give you 10 observations, like I did 2 days ago in the ICOSET talk, is give you some food for thought, give you some answers and some advice as to what to do if you want to roll out medical team training. So, as all of you know, since the IOM report in the US, at least in 1999, there's been an obsession with teamwork, and just about every hospital is trying to do something about it, at least in the US. And there are a number of programs that have surfaced, Teamstepps being one of them. And just to disclose, I was the scientist behind the scenes in the design and delivery of Teamstepps. It is used in just about all of the military hospitals in the U.S., in about 40% of the hospitals in the U.S. So other hospitals use what is called crew resource management, comes from the aviation environment. But anyway, whatever you want to call it, it's well accepted. There have been a number of reviews of the literature around medical team training, but most of the reviews have been qualitative in nature. So one of the things that I decided to do the last couple of years is to try to compile all of the empirical evidence and see if we can come up with a story. So the story I'm about to tell you is about all the empirical evidence that we have on medical team training, does it work or not. So this morning I'll tell you a little about medical team training, and like I said, give you 10, and I say additional observations because on Wednesday, I gave you 10 observations on the design and delivery of team training, but here is about the evaluation. There's going to be a little overlap, but because I want to emphasize a few points, but hopefully, again, this will give you some food for thought. The first thing I want to do is very quickly in one slide, I'm an organizational psychologist, so I spend a lot of time in organizations trying to evaluate performance, human performance, one kind over the other. So I wanted to give you very quickly how do we evaluate training. And it's really a hierarchy. And this slide illustrates the kind of data that we collect. And you start at the bottom with level 1 and try to go to the top at level 5. So the level 1, which is the easiest one to collect, is reaction data. Do the trainees like the training? Do they enjoy the instructor? Do they enjoy the venue? Whatever. Then level 2, did they learn the concepts? Usually this requires a test of some sort so that you know that the trainees got the knowledge. Then level 3 is behavior. Was there any transfer to the job? Did they show any behaviors back on the job in the OR, ER, whatever? The final one, level 4, is does these behaviors lead to better outcomes, more satisfaction, better sales, more productivity, better clinical outcomes, whatever. And at the end is a return on investment. And as you might imagine, just about every training that you've been, probably, every organization collects level 1 data. It's the easiest one. It's a smile test. Right after the training, you get a questionnaire, survey, 10 items, and you go from there. Very few organizations collect level 3, level 4. In fact, it's very difficult because you have to observe. You have to go to the job and observe the trainees under either experimental or controlled conditions and find out whether they indeed have shown there's transfer. And so most of the medical team training evaluations are at level 1 and level 2. We've seen in the last few years more evaluations on level 3 and level 4, and I'm going to share with you some of those results. Okay, observations. So here we go. There are 10 of these. The first one is team training works. Team training in general. And like I said, I've been doing this for a number of years. I worked for the military for 15 years before I became an academic. And my job was to design, deliver, evaluate team training projects for the military. And we conducted a number of studies over the years, and we found that these are now experts. These are military command and control personnel that with a 3-hour, 4-hour team training program, you can get this kind of results. And again, these are experts. In the Kannenbauer-Salas 98 reference, this is the kind of results that we found. In the aviation environment, these were real pilots with 10,000 hours or more. And this is the kind of effects that we found in simulation environments with the control groups. And over the years, people have basically said, 6% improvement. That is kind of low. And usually what I argue is 6%. If that 6% showed 1 or 2 more teamwork behaviors in the cockpit and saved the aircraft, this is a whopping effect. So don't get hung up on the numbers or the low or the high. I mean, what we're talking about is more behaviors, and these are more teamwork behaviors in the cockpit. So this showed to us, at least in the 90s, that you can. That all dogs can learn new tricks. So that gave us some hope. Recently, in 2008, I did a meta-analysis of all of the team training program, team training evaluations out there, including healthcare. So this included military, corporate, aviation, and that's not a p-value, that's a raw correlation. And overall, what we found is that team training accounted for 20% of the variance in team performance. This is a big effect. So, by the way, this is how I've used now this data to convince CFOs in hospitals of why they should roll out team training. I usually say, how much money you set aside for litigation? And for sake of simplicity, they say $100 million. And I say, wouldn't you want to save $20 million? That's what you're going to get out of team training. At that point, they usually shut up, don't ask any more questions, because once you translate this into a business case, it simply works. So the first observation, team training in general seems to work, and the data is there to that. Medical team training works, and the next two slides is a meta-analysis I've done on medical team training only. And I think this is the only study of its kind. We found 225 qualitative or quantitative articles that talk about medical team training. Out of those, about 105, 106 made it through our meta-analysis through the different filters. And the reason is that some of the studies are post-design only, some are pre and post, some are change scores, and some of them don't report not even means and standard deviations, so very difficult to do the statistics. But this is still in progress. We will be publishing this in the next few months, the quantitative part and the qualitative part. The quantitative part is going to be probably around 102, 104, 102, 103 medical team training articles. But just as an observation, another observation here, it is amazing to me that in the last 2 years, there's been an explosion of medical team training evaluations. Every single journal that I can think of has been publishing this kind of things. So that's good news. And more to come, I do believe. Let me summarize the results very quickly. Again, in this case, medical team training accounts for 25% of overall variance. Again, very good. Trainees like the program, they learn, they transfer the behaviors. And let me share with you what does that mean. So I've done a couple of these at Florida Hospital in Orlando. One of the few longitudinal medical team training evaluations that have been done, 18 months. So we were able to convince 2 surgeons to open their ORs to us, and 2 other surgeons as control groups. And we were able to train 2 surgeons to evaluate the team performance over 18 months. And we were able to show that indeed right after training, these behaviors were there, but as time went on, there was a decay of behaviors, and I'll say something more about that. But the last bullet is probably the most important one, that medical team training does account for patient outcomes, and especially mortality. It predicts about 4% of that, so I think that's very encouraging. Let me also say something about what I heard Atul go on there Wednesday and do a rebuttal on his presentation. He showed a study on medical team training, and he attributed to the checklist, which I kind of disagree that the whole thing was on the checklist, but because it was on medical team training. But he said it was 18% reduction in mortality. The interpretation is not quite that because the control group also had a 9% reduction in mortality. So the interpretation, really, the correct interpretation is that there was a 50% reduction in risk due to team training. So that's something to take into account. So medical team training works, in my opinion. I mean, this is the best effect sizes that you can get. We also, since we have coded, there's 150, actually 225 articles, but the ones that made it to the meta-analysis, we coded for a number of things. So whether they use simulation or not, and a number of other factors, and of course simulation matters, it works. When you use simulation in combination with a workshop on team training, it works. Here are some of the effect sizes. So simulation definitely enhances learning, it predicts effectiveness, And furthermore, when you combine simulation with information demonstration and you give good feedback, you get this kind of effects. So for those of you who are in simulation, it's a very powerful tool. And whatever team training you choose, again, the majority of them are information demonstration. They are workshops. Teamstepps is a workshop, 8-hour workshop. You need to marry it, put it together with the simulation. We also try to see whether if organizations or hospitals that did a team training needs analysis before rolling out team training had an effect. And indeed, those who do a training needs analysis have better outcomes. Training needs analysis essentially is whether before you roll out any training, you decide, who needs to be trained on what for, under what conditions, and what competencies, and those things. So once you do that analysis and you prepare the organization, then you get better results. Another thing that we found in this meta-analysis is that most organizations adapt some form of pre-existing team training program out there, whether it's Teamstepps, CRM, or whatever. So, one of the things that I now argue is, and I will advise to you is, before you roll this out, before you adapt one program per se, is you need to understand the coordination demand of your units. Not all teams are created equal. I've been in hospitals, in schools of medicine for a long time now, for the last 10, 15 years, and I can tell you that the degree, what is intriguing to me and what makes it different is that the level of task interdependency among your teams vary. So in ER, the task interdependency is very high. People depend on each other to complete the goal. In other places, the interdependency is less. So one of the things we're learning here is that one size doesn't fit all, but you need to be able to adapt this to your needs into the different demands, coordination demands that you have in your units. Here's the one that, this is now my opinion. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I feel like physicians are not engaged in this. I hope I don't offend anybody here, but if physicians don't consider themselves part of the team, this will never work. I give a lot of talks in hospitals. I can tell you one experience about a year ago. I was I went to a large school of medicine in the US. I was giving a talk on teamwork, and in the middle of my talk, one physician who was in front of me stood up, did it, and walked away. And so clear pushback to all these things. So to me, there are two things that are making medical team training difficult to be implemented in the hospitals. This is one of them. I'll tell you the second one. So physicians must be part of the team. I think enough said there. The last bullet is also important. There's a movement, and rightly so, to make the patient part of the team. And actually, in the next rollout of Teamstepps, which is Teamstepps 2.0, there'll be curriculum to teach everybody how to make the patient be part of the team. That's going to be interesting. Observation 7. Obviously, team training is not a panacea. It cannot solve all the patient safety problems. Sometimes I go to hospitals or schools of medicine and they think that team training is the cure for patient safety, and I say to them, it's not. It is a cure for training for patient safety. If you believe the data, team training only accounts for 20 to 25% of the variance. So something else you need to do something else, and this is where culture comes into play, leadership, incentives, and rewards. So. Again, when you think about the patient safety problem, team training is just one component for other things that you need to do. A lot of these things don't work if you don't reinforce it, if you don't maintain some sort of feedback in learning. And so one of the things that we learned over the last year or two in some of the hospitals is that if you don't develop coaches, which could be your leaders, if you don't prepare them, then these things fade away. So you need to, this is like a job A, you need people to be coaches and leaders of maintaining and reinforcing team training or teamwork. Here's the second reason why I think organizations sometimes hospitals fail to successfully roll out team training, and that's organizational conditions. And I said this Wednesday, and I'll say it again, and I've been writing this a lot. And this is my kind of insight to you. You can have the best team training in the world, the best teams in the world, but if the organization is not aligned to support teamwork, you'll never get the behaviors that you want. Recently, or Wednesday, I gave the example of one of the largest hospitals in the U.S. about 4 or 5 years ago, roll out team training at a cost of $8 million. And 2 or 3 years later, they called me and said, how come we're not getting the behaviors that we want after this rollout? And then I said, well, let's look at your conditions. Let's look at your CEO. What does he or she say? What signals do they send that these things matter? What kind of support do you provide? And so on and so on. And what policies and procedures do you have in place to support teamwork? And we found in that hospital that they were completely opposite. They wanted behavior A, but they were reinforcing and supporting behavior B. So over time, these behaviors went away. So if there's a message I tell you here today, not only pay attention to team training, but you need to pay attention to the organizations that you work for. And if you don't send the right signals, just remember, people are very good. You are very good at learning what does your bosses want from you, right? We read them very, very, very well, and then you do those behaviors, those cognitions, or and you have those attitudes depending on the kind of things that they think is important. The same thing is in organizations. And the last observation I'll make is that if team training works and you have the conditions, the question is how do you sustain it? And I think that's the biggest challenge in medical team training today. It's not whether it works or how you design it or how you deliver it. It's how do you sustain it. And sustainment to me, it should be no surprise to all of you, is about change. It's about organizational change. It's about organizational culture. And this is, like the last bullet says, it's a journey. It's not an event. Team training by itself won't do it. You have to have other things in place, like I've noted, and it should be ongoing. And I think that's, again, the biggest challenge. One other piece of advice that I will give you is, from my experience, is organizations get the behaviors and cognitions that they measure and reinforce. Period. You want teamwork in your hospitals, in your units, in your schools of medicine. You want teamwork from your students. Measure it, reinforce it. That's how organizations get things. So, very quickly, to conclude, rely on the science. There's a science of team training that's been going on for a number of years, 30, 40 years. We have shown now that team training can save lives. It accounts for 25% of team effectiveness. But what matters the most are the conditions. And finally, you must engage. Physicians must engage in doing this. In the aviation environment, which I've worked also for a number of years, it took 25 years for them to change. My first meetings with the captains, I was thrown out of the rooms in the 80s. Now, there's not one single captain in aviation that doesn't talk about teamwork, doesn't talk about CRM. So I think you must engage, and I hope that you take that and do something about it. Finally, if you're in Orlando and you see this license plate, honk, that might be me behind there. Thank you very much. How can I help?